Imagine you are walking through a cretaceous forest at night and suddenly realize that someone is watching you. It's Freddy Krueger among the dinosaurs, coming to you in a nightmare. Hello, my name is Serhi.
And I'm Emma, and today we'll talk about the Therizinosaurus.
It's about the largest in its family and the most mysterious dinosaur overall. It's Therizinosaurus kiloniformis.
It became renowned for its formidable front claws, measuring up to 1 full meter in length. These are the longest claws among all modern and extinct animals, but their exact purpose is still under question.
Let's start from the very beginning. The first specimens were found in Mongolia in 1948. The find was named Therizinosaurus, which means scythe lizard, and the species name kiloniformis, which means turtle-like, because it was mistakenly believed that the claws belonged to a turtle-like reptile.
Many years would pass, and several more skeletal fragments would be found, before in 1970 the hypothesis was put forward that the Therizinosaurus was not a turtle, but a predatory theropod. But even this isn't entirely accurate.
No complete skeleton of Therizinosaurus kiloniformis has been found to this day. Henceforth, we'll just say Therizinosaurus, meaning this specific species.
All that has been found are only forelimbs, shoulder blades, fragments of hind limbs, and ribs, though their status is still under question. All of this is indicated on the image.
And then a logical question arises about reconstructing the general appearance of these animals. So is all of this completely made up?
Partially, that's true. Of course, we cannot 100% assert that this is exactly how the Therizinosaurus looked, that it was covered with exactly such feathers, exactly such a color, and so on. However, there is something that helps us learn more about this animal, having only a few bones.
And these are relatives of the Therizinosaurus. Over many years, more and more new dinosaurs were discovered that were related to the Therizinosaurus. A lot of time passed before paleontologists untangled this taxonomic tangle and assigned them to the family Therizinosauridae.
Finally, a definitive answer was given to the question of whether the Therizinosaurus was a sauropod. The diagram shows that none of the dinosaurs presented had a complete skeleton found, yet their relatedness suggests they also had a similar appearance.
So what do we have? The Therizinosaurus lived in what is now Mongolia, approximately 70 million years ago. By comparing the bone sizes of other Therizinosauridae, we estimate the Therizinosaurus's length to be around 9 to 10 meters, meaning its height was approximately 6 to 7 meters. It had a large barrel-shaped body, a relatively short tail, and a long neck with a small head. Its weight is estimated differently, but we will focus on 3 to 5 EDOTs.
Since the skull of the Therizinosaurus itself has not been discovered, scientists rely on the remains of related dinosaurs, specifically Erlikosaurus. Its head is relatively small with a horny beak, and its small teeth are designed for consuming plant matter.
It was a real discovery, since it was thought before that Therizinosaurus was a predator, like all theropods it belonged to.
Besides its teeth, a plant-based diet is further suggested by its large barrel-shaped body, which had to accommodate a great deal of low-calorie food. Perhaps the Therizinosaurus also occasionally fed on small, slow-moving animals, but plants were still the main basis of its diet.
It's interesting that the remains of an ancient relative named Falcarius were found. This Therizinosauridae lived between 125 and 130 million years ago in what is now the USA. The structure of its teeth suggests that this species was omnivorous, making Falcarius a representative of a transitional type from carnivorous theropods to the herbivorous ones that Therizinosaurids eventually became.
Falcarius could potentially have been prey for the Utah raptor, which we talked about in the previous video. Be sure to watch it, there's a lot of interesting stuff. Do you want to cook like a real professional chef? Choose Theri-knife. Sharpness inspired by the Therizinosaurus.
Let's return to our Therizinosaurus. The skeletal structure of other Therizinosaurids indicates that Therizinosaurus walked on its hind legs, much like all theropods.
Feather impressions of Therizinosaurus have also not been found, but Beipiaosaurus, a small Therizinosauridae, definitely had them. It lived about 125 million years ago in the area that is now China. Of course, just like in the case of the Utah raptor from the previous video, we cannot claim with 100% certainty that Therizinosaurus had feathers, but it was still quite likely.
There is also a high likelihood that the Therizinosaurus was warm-blooded. Feathers and warm-bloodedness were discussed in more detail in the previous video about the Velociraptor and the Utah raptor.
They, along with Therizinosaurus, are relatives of birds, had feathers, and were warm-blooded.
And finally, the main feature that distinguishes Therizinosaurus from other dinosaurs is its long claws. It is time to find out why the dinosaur needs them.
Other Therizinosauridae also possessed long claws, but they simply couldn't compare to Therizinosaurus with its nearly meter-long sides.
When it became clear that Therizinosaurus was a theropod and not a turtle, a completely logical assumption was made that it was a predator, so it could use its claws to hunt prey.
Then, when it became known that therizinosaurs are herbivorous dinosaurs, the purpose of the claws changed from weapons of attack to weapons of defense.
In movies, games, and even online videos, you can see Therizinosaurus piercing its attackers through.
He looks like some kind of Freddy Krueger or Wolverine from X-Men of the Cretaceous period. However, he couldn't use his scythes like these fictional characters. Let's find out why.
To pierce an object, you need a strong weapon, a powerful and precise strike. The Therizinosaurus was a very large and strong dinosaur, but could it deliver precise and coordinated strikes? Unlikely. The 5-ton dinosaur had a small head, and accordingly a small brain, and it's hard to imagine it as a professional swordmaster or fencer.
And one more thing. Let's look at the boxers. These athletes train to deliver precise, highly coordinated punches with their fists. Yet there is still a risk of injuring them. And the Therizinosaurus would have had to strike with straight fingers, which most likely would lead to fractures. Still, his skeleton wasn't made of adamantium, and claw studies showed they weren't that strong, nor designed for piercing enemies. So the Therizinosaurus wasn't a deadly killer.
However, its claws could still be used for defense, serving as a powerful deterrent. Its body structure indicated that the animal was relatively slow, so escape as a primary defense was not an option. An adult Therizinosaurus was a large creature and evidently had few natural predators. Let's consider its potential attackers.
Adasaurus was a dromaeosaurid about 2.5 to 3.5 meters long and weighing 35 to 85 kilograms. It could only be dangerous to Therizinosaurus young.
Alioramus is a tyrannosaurid about 5 to 6 meters long and approximately 500 to 700 kilograms. Although it was not small, it could not pose a threat to an adult Therizinosaurus, except possibly to the young.
Tarbosaurus batar, a tyrannosaurid about 10 meters long and weighing 4.5 to 5 tons, the only potential enemy of an adult Therizinosaurus.
They were similar in size and weight, but their unique body structure meant they had different heights. Therizinosaurus was about 6 to 7 meters, and Tarbosaurus was about 3 meters at the hips. So the hero of our video had a height advantage.
He could use his claws specifically against the Tarbosaurus. We don't know exactly how this happened. Therizinosaurus might have held them out in front of him, swinging his arms, threatening enemies. He could strike wide, scratching an attacker, like what cats do. Of course, there was a risk of breaking claws, but life is more important. Besides, as studies have shown, broken claws could grow back. Tarbosaurs most likely hunted alone, so a Therizinosaur could probably put up a fight one-on-one.
So, to summarize, Therizinosaurus most likely used its claws for defense, intimidating opponents by waving its long forelimbs, but it did not impale its enemies, as is often depicted in films or online videos. Another hypothesis was that their claws were used for digging. Among modern animals, aardvarks, armadillos, and anteaters come to mind. These creatures possess strong and quite long claws to dig into the earth, destroy termite mounds, and tear apart anthills. There was even a suggestion at one point that Therizinosaurus was also insectivorous.
However, as was stated earlier, his claws were not strong enough and not suitable for digging, and it's hard to imagine how a 5-ton Therizinosaurus could feed itself on insects. The largest modern representatives of the animal world that feed on insects are the aardvark, giant anteater, and giant armadillo, which do not even weigh 100 kilograms. Their extinct relatives, who also fed on insects, were not much larger, while the giant relatives of armadillos, glyptodonts, were herbivorous.
And finally, another important use for their claws was for feeding. The Therizinosaurus, a herbivorous dinosaur that stood taller than modern-day giraffes, occupied a similar ecological niche, feeding on the leaves of trees or tree ferns. Its long fingers with claws allowed it to pull branches towards itself, much like modern sloths do. They also possess long claws which they utilize for defense when attacked by predators. There was even a hypothesis that the Therizinosaurus could climb trees like a sloth. But now it sounds like a joke, a 5-ton animal in a tree. Let's also recall the ancestor of modern sloths, the Megatherium. The animal measured about 6 meters in length, weighing approximately 4 tons. It also fed on leaves from trees, pulling the branches towards itself.
Megatherium could reach branches with its paws that its head could not reach. Therizinosaurus, on the other hand, had a rather long neck. It could reach branches that its paws could not, and it seemed that claws weren't really necessary. Giraffes come to mind again. However, they have long, flexible tongues that help them grasp and pluck leaves. Therizinosaurus did not have this ability, so its front paws that hold the branch with leaves would be useful.
So, we've established that the dinosaur utilized its enormous claws for feeding and also for protection against its enemies. However, this still doesn't fully explain why they are so excessively large. The animal could have easily managed with much smaller claws just like those found on other Therizinosauridae. Therefore, this particular aspect still remains a complete mystery.
There is another assumption that the Therizinosaurus could use its claws in courtship displays, attracting the attention of females. And of course, they could be used in fights with other males. Light a fire. Gather your friends and savor a taste that remembers millions of years. Cretaceous forest marshmallows with ginkgo and araucaria flavor.
Regarding their offspring, it's purely speculative. Paleontologists have not discovered any nests, eggs, or baby skeletons that could be identified as Therizinosaurus. Therefore, all of this is just assumption.
They might have laid eggs in primitive nests, dug into the ground, and guarded them. It is unlikely that a 5-ton animal would sit on them. Maybe they covered them with vegetation to keep them warm, and then cared for their offspring in the same way modern birds do. However, let us repeat, these are all just assumptions. It is also unknown whether they lived alone or in groups.
Well, unfortunately, that's all. If you know any other interesting facts about the Therizinosaurus that we didn't mention, write them in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe.
And to the one who leaves the first comment, I like Therizinosaurus, we will give a shout out in the next video. See you.